Who is the go-to resource for the lowdown on international school recruiting during and after COVID? Thanks to an introduction from Super Connector, Laura Light, we were fortunate enough to connect with one of the best placed people for answers to our recruiting questions. Pauline O'Brien is the Global Recruitment Business Strategy Development Director at International School Services, ISS. We peppered Pauline with lots of questions to help our listeners deepen their understanding of where things stand concerning recruiting and other trends in international education. Here are a few of the many topics that Pauline spoke to. Check out the show notes for the complete list. Pauline's background working at the Council of International Schools, CIS, and the corporate world supports her work with schools to bring new perspectives and ideas to how they go about their work, especially in building systems. Accountability and measurement are so crucial in making decisions. The recruiting season is no longer a season. It's now year-round. Veteran international educators should avoid being overconfident simply because they have experience in recruiting. So much has changed recently. A few related trends deal with health insurance, well-being, support for staff, PD, and yes, crisis management. To learn more about Pauline's career, please check out the show notes for her bio. This episode was recorded on December 18, 2023. We now give you the super connected and knowledgeable Pauline O'Brien.
Hi, Pauline. Thank you so much for being on the show. Welcome.
Thank you.
And tell us, first of all, where in the world you are.
Yeah, it's really a pleasure to be here with you both today. I'm in the Netherlands in Europe right
Nice.
now, and that's been my home base for, almost 36 years now.
Wow.
I was born in the UK to Irish parents, and we moved back to Ireland when I was 5. And then I left Ireland when I was 17 for a gap year.
Nice.
And it's been a very long gap year. I've never actually gone back to live in Ireland. Obviously, I visit a lot, but I've never lived in Ireland before, but still consider myself very Irish. So the Netherlands has been my home base as I've worked internationally actually over the past 30 years. So this is where my family, my husband, and our 2 daughters live.
Fantastic. So it sounds as though hiding behind that, you've got some pretty awesome going global stories. Would you care to share some thoughts with us?
Yeah, I think the biggest privilege I've had throughout my career is to help others move around the world. I've traveled extensively in all of the positions I've had, but the going global piece is when you support, teachers or leaders or teaching couples and you help them find their next adventure, and that really changes their life. I think that's, and there's so many stories. It would be difficult to choose one, but what I can share is just a couple of weeks ago, I was on a school visit in Vietnam. And as I walked around that school, I kept hearing my name, people going, Pauline,
Oh,
is
wow.
it you? Hello. Oh my goodness, hello. It's great to see you. And it was so lovely. But they were various people that I had helped over the years who happened all to be in this school now. But I didn't help them get into that particular school. It was years ago then I'd
Right.
supported them. But you build these connections and the relationships become quite intimate for a short space of time, and quite intense probably is a better word. When you're helping somebody, for instance a leader, find their next role, and then if they have a teaching partner, does the teaching partner get a role? So you're very much involved in people's lives for a short space of time, and then you stay in touch, particularly through the transition and then beyond the transition, to make sure that the opportunity was the one they expected, right? And so it was a complete pleasure to meet all these people. And it's not really answering your question about going global, but I followed many, many people during my time around the world. And that's just such a privilege, I have to say. And I get to visit so many schools through my work, so many conferences. I get to work in schools doing training. I do a lot with women in leadership. I support the International Task Force on Child Protection. I chair the Recruitment Regulations and Reporting Committee currently. That work is extremely important to me to make sure that we're safeguarding our schools. So, that's kind of going global for me. It's a lot of different pieces to support schools and educators worldwide.
That is just fantastic. You're so much like Laura Light, where you're one of these connector people and you remember people clearly. And it's just wonderful to hear about those relationships and assisting other people to go global, which is just so amazing, and helping them find the right fit, if we can quote our buddy Greg Lemoyne. So thank you for sharing that. I'm envious. I think it sounds like your job is really, really enriching and satisfying and just fabulous. So thank you for that.
It is, thank you. And I think you have to really enjoy this type of work all the time and being on, particularly at conferences. I get stopped in the hallways, I get stopped in the elevators, I even get stopped in the bathroom. So, you're totally on all of the time, and you have to thrive on that work, I think, to really enjoy it and to know that connecting people is all of the time. And that's the wonderful thing about being in person together again. I think that's something I didn't quite enjoy in COVID, that I was isolated from human beings like everybody. I really need that. I need to be out and about and with people as well for me to, feel fulfilled in being able to make those connections, being able to see people in the hallway and saying, "Hey, Audrey, I want to introduce you to somebody. Come with me." You don't
I
really do
love it.
that on Zoom anymore, do you? It's really difficult to do that on Zoom.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yes. Could we just maybe go a little further? Because before we started recording, you were sharing a little bit about your perspective coming in as not having been an international educator and how that really led to some different perspectives for you. Could you please share a bit more about that?
Of course, I had the opportunity to join the Council of International Schools almost 10 years ago. And I was brought in at the time to refresh the recruitment landscape. I think that was the language that was used, and to professionalize it. My background is in professional recruiting, and that's what I'm trained in. And so when I came in, I had a look at the practices that were currently in play in international schools around recruiting. And it was a little shocking, to be honest, because there weren't a lot of systems set up. There were practices, but they weren't at a level that they needed to be in terms of equity, in terms of child safeguarding, in terms of professionalism, really. And biases came into play all the time,
Mm,
and we're all guilty of that. But we didn't have robust systems in place. This is how we recruit from A to Z, and everybody in school gets recruited in this way. So CIS at the time wanted to really look at that and look at the landscape and see how CIS could contribute to improving recruiting systems. At the same time, the whole child safeguarding and lack of child safeguarding came to the fore with some events that happened 2014, 2015. And we don't need to go into those, I think, today, but it really shifted the landscape of schools really needing to set up systems to make sure that recruiting was done differently.
mm,
My different perspective was that I hadn't taught in international schools, so I didn't know. I knew the schools here in the Netherlands, but I didn't know all the schools around the world.
right.
I didn't have a huge network at all. I knew no one. And so I was really building from scratch. And I did so by interviewing lots and lots of people. So when a role was advertised at CIS, nowadays I would be able to screen and vet quite quickly and be able to whittle 100 candidates down to 20 that I might interview today, let's say. Where back then I interviewed the 100 because I
Oh,
wanted to learn and I wanted to gain perspective. So that was my learning in really listening and understanding schools, understanding curriculum, understanding accreditation, understanding assessment, understanding vertical alignment across a school in many ways. I learned all of these things by listening.
wow.
And that's how I built my knowledge. And that paired with visiting schools, with sitting in sessions at teacher recruitment, I also learned at teacher conferences, I actually went and sat in the sessions at teacher conferences, and people used to say to me, "You should stand behind your exhibit desk." And I'd say, "Well, I'm not going to learn anything behind the exhibit desk when everyone is in session." And so I went and I sat and I learned from teachers, from counselors, from librarians, middle leaders. I went and sat and learned. And that's something I still do to this day. I go into sessions because it also helps you meet and connect with people.
True.
So that was my huge learning curve. And from that is how I learned to put my recruitment skills, in being able to assess skills, competencies, expertise with the requirements of a school.
I love it. And I'm just going to bring forward something you said off mic, that it helped you to be a little more objective about people when you were looking at their competencies and things.
I think I was totally objective because I didn't know anyone.
Yeah.
So all I had to go on was the job description, what the school had told me, the school leaders had told me, the board, etc. So I was really assessing skills and competencies and backgrounds.
Yeah.
I wasn't saying, "Oh, I know Audrey," or "I know David. I could give them a call for this role." I didn't have that way back when. And because of that, I believe, one of the first lists I was putting across to a school, I remember, someone saying to me, "I don't know anybody on this list at all." And I think it was because I didn't know anyone. So I was really looking purely at skills and competencies.
Which really should play a pretty big role in recruiting.
Yeah,
But being
absolutely.
honest, a lot of it is who you know even today. And so I love that you had that sort of outsider's perspective and were able to be more objective like that. And then you also shared off mic that now that you do know everyone, quote unquote, it's harder for you to maintain that non-bias perspective.
Yeah, I need to check myself, for
Yes,
sure, and also because I know schools as well, but I have to say I do keep the hat on that just because somebody comes from school X doesn't mean they're automatically going to be great in school Y. We still have to assess that.
absolutely.
And while I might know you in your current school and you're fabulous in this current school and you know that you're thriving and doing well, it's an indicator that a particular school might suit you, but it's not a given.
Right.
And so it's really important that vetting and screening and your interviewing really continues to be robust around that new opportunity. And it's not just, "Oh, I know somebody, I'll push them across."
Right. And then additionally, you talked about all the schools you visited and the feel you got. Maybe you can mention that a little bit more?
Of course, there's nothing like being in school for me. You really understand the heartbeat of a school as you walk around it. Prior to international education, I would have always gone into industry and spent, a week doing what we called a fact finding mission at the time, for me to get to know an organization from the inside before I would actually start recruiting for that organization. And so I'm used to going into observing and analyzing and understanding and making sure I'm not making assumptions, but actually clarifying what I'm seeing. And so walking around a school for me, you can always really get a good sense of the vibe, the atmosphere. People say to me, "Oh, we've got a great sense of community at our school." I'm looking for evidence of that as I go through the corridors in the school. I'm waiting to see, are parents really talking to teachers? Are teachers talking to each other? How does that really work? Are students happy? What are the relationships on the playground? And of course, it's a short look on something, and you wouldn't want to assume that that's the way it is,
Yeah.
but you do get a feel. And I think it's powerful to be in a school and to feel people's passion or not, as the case may be,
Yeah.
but I think it's fascinating and it really informs my work a lot. It really helps.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing all that.
Yes, that really opens the door to a lot of discussions, I think, about accountability and holding that mirror up in all of our practices across the international school system and our individual schools and as individual educators. So I also bring in the point that one of the things that we talk about as international educators is what helps schools grow and take on new ideas is every year you get some new teachers and we say they bring new eyes and new ideas and all that. Yet, what I'm learning right now is that we bring certain biases as educators, and most of them are pretty positive. But one of them is we don't want to hurt feelings. We don't want to say, well, you told me you were doing XYZ and I've been here for 3 months and we're really not doing that. And that would be what do we call a critical conversation. That would be very difficult. So I see the strength in bringing someone like yourself working in industry as a consultant and bringing those new ideas to this huge area of international education that we call recruiting. You mentioned like three other topics that you really work on, and I think we're going to have you back, Pauline, to talk about some of those other ones for sure. But before we get to our guiding question, because so many new people coming to international education are going to be listening, and our veterans, maybe they haven't recruited in a while, are probably wondering about international school services and really what services do you offer when it comes to recruiting? What do you do to help those new and those veterans?
We offer a number of services, but I think the first one is to get signed up with ISS so that you've got your details on our platform and that you can be found by international schools. I think that's step one. So making sure that you have your resume uploaded and you've completed the platform requirements, because once you're on the inside, then you have inside the platform, you have the opportunity to see the different types of positions that are available worldwide around the schools. And so, in looking at vacancies that are available, that triggers hopefully some interest in a school, in a place. And then the questions that candidates can ask is, gosh, I've seen this vacancy. Can somebody tell me more about that school? Or can somebody help me get some more information? And that's, I think, step one. Step two is through our EDU Learn platform as well, we're offering a lot of courses to help those going into international education for the first time as well, the things that candidates really should consider. Because we hear horror stories, don't we? You know, somebody takes a job in Asia or in Africa or in the Middle East, and they've done research, but they haven't done the correct research to know, am I going to a reputable school? You know, am I going to get paid at the end of the month? You know, am I going to be safe? All of those things. So we've identified that need. So as part of our EDU Learn Passport course, there are many things about how to select a school that's going to match your own mission, vision, values, really going to sit with you, how to interview, how to negotiate, the things to think about when you're negotiating your package. So we offer a lot of that through our courses. And then we work with all levels within a school, whether that's teacher recruitment, middle leadership recruitment, or senior leaders as well. We work with boards to support them in selecting heads of school. We work with heads of schools to help them select principals. So very broad. Our offering is very broad. We work with an amazing team of professionals who come from international education as well. The expertise on our team is phenomenal, I have to say. It's an absolute pleasure to meet and work with all of the folks that support candidates and schools, and there's a passion there to do so. And I think that's what also sets ISS apart. You know, we really care about what we're doing intricately, and for us, it's about getting the best people in front of students. And our tagline is making a world of difference. And I think we all take that really seriously each and every day we come to work.
Your EDU Learn Passport program, which I know has a full range of professional learning opportunities. I think that is so cool that you offer courses for those who are new to recruiting. And I wonder if veterans, like I'm saying, that haven't maybe gone out in quite some time need a refresher. So that is a huge value add that you're doing that. So bravo.
Thank you. And I think the landscape has changed so much as well. So it's important to keep up to date, isn't it, on newest trends and things to look out for. And recruitment has changed from what it used to be. 10 years ago, it was different. Prior to COVID, it was different. And now we see different trends as well. So I think it helps everybody just keep up to date.
And thanks for that segue right into our guiding question. So I'm going to ask the big guiding question, but then let's hold off and trying to answer them in the big macro response. And we're going to break it down to some smaller questions. So our guiding question is, what are recent changes and possible trends in international school recruiting? So big, meaty question there. And let's start with kind of going backwards in time a little bit. Looking back at the 2022-23 recruiting season, what was it like, especially kind of returning to normal after COVID?
I hope I can just share a little story about when I came
Yes,
into international
please.
education, as I said, 10 years ago, and I learned about recruitment fairs. And I learned about how people were interviewed in guest bedrooms
Yes.
and how that all worked. And as a professional at the time, I have to say, I was shocked. I was like, pardon? People get interviewed in guest bedrooms? Really? And my first recruitment fair, and people laughed at me a lot, I'll have to say this. I organised a fair in London, and when I was negotiating with the hotels, I went into the guest bedrooms and I said they had to move the beds closest to the wall. I had banners created so people could put a banner up in front of the wall. I mandated that the door had to stay open, that the candidate would sit closest to the door. I came up with all of this stuff because I was just horrified. I was like, you just. And then as I learned from other heads of schools, and that was almost a relief that people said, no, we don't like doing this. It's just the way it's been all of these years. It's not something we choose to do. And I've heard some wonderful stories about, people being recruited in hotel guest rooms. I have to say that has shifted completely now. I don't see that a lot anymore. And certainly for ISS, we've been making sure that, that people can interview in different places. So people are interviewing in the ballrooms now where the sign up used to happen. It's less worried about if somebody hears my conversation, they're going to steal my candidate. I know that used to be the case that people wanted it all private. I see that it certainly has changed. People are just, I think also through COVID, through being on Zoom and all of the different trends, people are just going with the flow, I think, and just, using the resources they have. And people are uncomfortable being in guest bedroom, let's be honest. So that's a welcome change. Sorry, that was just something I remembered coming in.
Oh, no, absolutely. I mean, both David and I have been in that situation, and it is weird to know that that head of school was sleeping in that bed until a few hours ago type of thing, and it's very weird, I have to say.
Yeah, and the logistics around getting those rooms cleaned before the day started, right? That was also a logistics for us as organizers, making sure that all these guest bedrooms were spick and span and ready to receive the candidates coming in. COVID was really difficult in terms of for people to hire online. For some people to hire online, others, some people thrive on that and they really enjoy the online piece and they don't see that it's necessary to always be in person to hire. But those who relied on fairs, that was the way they recruited, COVID was extremely difficult, extremely difficult. And you don't pick up on Zoom things you'll pick up when you're in person with someone, no matter how qualified of an interviewer you are. It's literally impossible. And so I think what I'm hearing now, David, from heads of schools is that some people that were hired in COVID did not work out because there wasn't that face to face and that interaction. And we're hearing, so, as we went back to normal, as you put it, there were many people who said, oh, well, we don't need to go back to in person fairs because we don't need them. But then the realization of actually, if I'm not sitting in front of someone and I don't spend really good time with them face to face, could result in me not hiring the best person for our students, has brought people back to fairs. Because at ISS, we also asked ourselves, are in person fairs still necessary? And we've since learned they are. But you also have a generation who are not used to the fairs, who are only used to online hiring. And so we're seeing that shift that people are signing up for fairs and then not turning up because they think, okay, what's going on here? We had a fair last year, we had quite a good sign up, and then not everybody turned up. And it was more than the 10% you might have expected, prior to COVID of people not turning up. And we thought, why? And our team actually spent a lot of time analyzing this and speaking to people and saying, why did you not turn up? And this younger generation who doesn't yet know the value of that in-person connection and what you can achieve by it, they said, well, we signed up because we knew the heads of school would look at our profile then if they thought we were coming to the fair. So we got ahead of them. We got in front of them.
Wow.
It's an interesting trend, right? And yet we've now gone through a cycle. This is our second year of fairs now, and we're seeing that even those young folks, I call them, they are seeing the value of the in-person piece again. That was palatable this time.
I was very curious about that. We had some inside scoop with a friend We think we know which conference that was. And I was really wondering what was going on. So that helps explain it as well. So are some schools doing a lot of the video conferencing to line up their dance card for when they go to the fair? Is that part of the process for some of the schools?
Yes, absolutely. People are starting earlier and earlier, aren't they? Recruitment has become year round rather than the, what was it, September to February timeframe that used to be there years ago. People are doing what they can to maximize and be as efficient as they can at the fairs. I'm hearing that people don't want the cattle market anymore. People don't want to be overwhelmed with 20 people in front of their table and not being able to really have valuable conversations. I think people are really looking at what's the return on investment as well. Do I go to a fair for networking purposes, or do I go to a fair to really hire someone? I think these are all things that school leaders are considering. And in some cases, I know school heads who are just going to promote their school, and that's fine. And if they manage to pick up somebody for their pipeline in the future, that's fine too. I think people are always thinking about how many interviews am I going to get? And from those interviews, how many people am I going to hire? I think that's the consideration.
So the disruption of COVID, there's so many ramifications, but I'm learning right now that one, it led to a certain amount of reflection for schools in how they recruit. And I think the broader theme that we keep hearing about is that human connection. And it's so important, but we can find balance. There's the continuum in life. Certain schools are going to feel very comfortable, maybe doing a lot of video interviewing, especially with veterans, and they might know them, but from what you're saying earlier, there could be some biases there. But then there's the other end of the spectrum as well, where schools are saying, we really want to meet these people, but we can talk to them ahead of time and be very efficient when we get there. And so I also have to smile as an instructional technologist, a change agent. We often use the acronym TWATI. That's the way we've always done it. When we come in and try to get teachers to try new ways to do things, so, what I'm hearing from you is the whole system has been stuck a little bit. That's the way we've always done it, like with the guest rooms in the hotels. People have questioned that forever. And so it's great to hear that a few voices have said, wait a minute, this just doesn't make sense. Let's change it. So, that's very much appreciated.
Yeah, I also think the next generation of leaders coming through have also questioned how long can they be out of school at any given time. I know in the past that some people would get on the road in, I think, November, one of the first fairs took place, and then they could be on the road until February. So that's a lot of time out of school. People would go from one fair to the next, and that's how it was done. Whereas people are saying, okay, where did I hire the most candidates? Where did I have, the most bang for my buck? How much time will I have out of school? So this year, the NISA conference and the AirCos conference were both held in Bangkok. I think you know that. And so, from an ISS perspective, we thought, okay, school leaders, it would be a good opportunity for us to have an event then, because school leaders are out of school anyway. They're paying for a fare to Bangkok. They can extend a couple of days or come in early a couple of days. And we're supporting them in that way with not having to take them out at another time from school. There's some of the strategies that ISS tries to look at, like how can we support leaders, if they're going to X conference anyway, how can we support through our activities to make that the best experience for them, and how can we help out in that way?
It's always great to hear that some of these large organizations that have been around a long time are even so looking to flex and move with the times and stay relevant, and it's awesome.
That's part of our strategic conversation the whole time, Audrey, is how do we stay relevant and not be, we've always done it this way, so why do we need to change?
Yeah,
But I think schools are changing, and with it, for us to stay relevant and for schools to get the best out of ISS, we need to work together and continue to collaborate. And
right.
that's a lot of the work that I would do in connecting with leaders around the world, is understanding the need. How is the landscape shifting? What are the differences? How does an organization like ISS support you? what are the things that you'll need from us so that we can do so?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'll never forget the first time. It had been a while since I had been recruiting, and I was confused because I went online and the model used to be that you would pay up front for ISS services plus the fare fee. And I went on and there was nothing about where to pay for the fare. And so I phoned and said, I don't understand. And they said, well, if you go to the fair, then you pay the fee. I said, if I go to a fair. So that was a big change, for me. And that was 15 years ago. So I've really enjoyed watching the changes happen. So what about the current recruiting season and how it compares to either pre-COVID and or more recent? What's going on moving forward?
We've seen that, as I said already, recruitment is all year round. ISS started their online fairs, I think maybe 10 or 12 years ago. They were the front runner in the online system. So we've continued that this year and we've done regional iFairs as well to support different time zones.
Nice.
So we've really done this hybrid, so in person and online. We've seen improved numbers at our in person events this year. So I think that need for personal touch, human connections is there. And we've seen huge numbers at our iFairs as well. So there's still a need for both. So that's what I would say. People keep talking about the teacher shortage
Oh,
around the
yeah.
world. And that's a whole other subject, isn't it? We've always worked with universities to try and get graduating teachers to come and be part of the international school world. Actually, Audrey, you mentioned Queen's and TORF earlier on. I've had the privilege of being twice at TORF when I was with the CIS to get students involved and to make them aware of these international opportunities, because that's it, isn't it? It's the awareness. And we continue to build university partnerships with ISS to see how we can introduce international teaching and to see if we can help create practicums or internships within international school settings to help people get a feel of the international world before they start teaching in their home country and get settled, etc. So we continue to look at those opportunities to see who can we partner with to again broaden the talent base that's available to international schools. Also through our commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion and justice, we're also trying to make connections with universities who perhaps weren't tapped into in previous times to look at how can we broaden our candidate base for schools as well. There's a lot going on behind the scenes.
So I'm curious if you're now looking more internationally at universities all over the world to reach the teacher candidates and talk to them about, hey, guess what? There's this whole international thing.
It's a great question. That's the ongoing conversation. And there's a word for it now, geo-targeting. So we're looking at which universities can we tap into, can we contact and speak to. And we also have to pay attention. There's a national deficit of teachers as well. So
Right.
universities can be slightly reluctant, right, for us to come in and say, hey, we want to make your teachers aware of these opportunities. But we're working with regional associations as well to see how can we support different programs within schools.
Awesome.
Audrey just hit on the topic I was most curious about because I was going to reach out. I used to do a podcast with Mark Hofer, who's a professor at a college, the College of William and Mary School of Education, and ask him what he's seeing with the number of students that are in their program and if they're aware of going international. But I didn't do it because I was worried that they feel so much pressure to get these young people out into the public school system in the state of Virginia. Yet, people have the right to know what their choices are. And it's a competitive world, right?
Correct. Yeah. That's why, even though it's slow progress, we keep on it to try and see how it's all about information. We want people to be aware. Ultimately, it's their choice, isn't it? But if they don't know what they don't know, and that's what we want to make sure is that the awareness is there of this amazing international school world that they could be part of.
Exactly. And we're going to get into a couple questions that hit on back to growing their understanding of what are the possibilities? A lot of wonderful possibilities. But as we know, those young teachers with the least amount of experience probably are going to get the offers from the schools that might not be accredited, might be in very difficult places for them socioeconomically to make that start. So, with that help you're giving them, I think there's a lot of responsibility in educating them clearly that they're ready, and I think some real hand holding to help them go through that process.
Correct. Yeah, it's a lot of what we do, and particularly around how do candidates choose their new home? Because school becomes home when you move abroad. Your social networks, your SOS networks, right, are all at school. And so, how do you first? I think the first question is, who are you as a teacher? How do you like to teach? You're really that self awareness rather than let me just go get a job because I'm a teacher. No, how do I like to teach? What are my own mission, vision, values? Like, how do I know that I'm going to thrive in a particular environment? So, if we just take the classroom setting as a first step, you've got to break it down into different pieces. So I think the first thing is, what type of a teacher am I? What type of a colleague am I? What type of a team player am I? And you broaden that out to, will I do well living in the middle of a remote area? Or do I need to be in a hustling, bustling city? And really just unpacking all of those things. And I often say in the orientation session that I do at the fairs, have you told loved ones of your intentions? Because often young teachers don't discuss this at all with any of their significant family members. And I'm often laughed at in that first candidate orientation. You can see already yeah, all right, okay, what is she talking about? And I often tell people, you might get 3 or 4 or 5 offers this weekend, and these will be serious offers and binding if you accept. And so, what mechanisms have you put in place? What strategies have you put in place to help you make those decisions? And I always love at how everyone looks at me in that session. And then as the fair goes on, how people come back and say, "Oh, you said that. Can you talk to me more about that?" And then at the end of a fair, that people go, "We looked at you in that first session and thought, yeah, right." And then actually at the end of the fair, they've gone through all of these things that we've actually spoken to them about.
Well, we've just flowed right into the question I was going to ask. How do you support first timers? And so you have an orientation program. It sounds like at the fairs, you have information through your platform, your professional learning platform. Are there any other ways that you have outreach to help these first timers kind of have buckets of information for them to think about? You've already shared a few.
Yeah. It's part of the prep for them coming to the fair. They're really given, a checklist beforehand of the research they should be doing, of schools, of all the things I've mentioned, what about themselves first, but also the schools that they're intending to go to. And also, I want to go to the American School of Paris. Why? And really unpacking that. Is it the romantic view of Paris or Milan or whatever school it is, and what do you really know about the school and what research have you done? And then at the fairs, both iFair and in-person fairs, ISS always has a huge contingent of its team there who've all taught overseas or led overseas to really handhold and sit and be experts to be able to help candidates navigate the stress, first off. And then, secondly, just to make sure that you help them navigate the different considerations they need to have when thinking about these different offers or different countries or different schools.
So, in a way, you're doing a lot of life coaching.
Yes.
So, I think that's pretty awesome. And
Yes.
I know a life coach who I'm very close to that I think ISS ought to think about bringing on and help with this process. So, Audrey, what do you say, life coach?
Uh,
Thank you for the plug, David. Fantastic. Actually, if you don't mind, I was going to just say, Pauline, that we developed a resource that is a spreadsheet that's called Profiling Schools, Cities, and Countries. And we've put all of the things we can think of into it regarding the considerations, the criteria that you might investigate. And then we've put a scoring system in there.
okay, wow.
And So that's a nice support, and maybe we can talk more about that off mic as to whether that would be something that you would want to look at.
Sure.
And maybe you can give us some input on it and
Sure.
whether there's things we should add, and
What a
also
great resource.
whether
Yeah.
maybe ISS would want to
Yeah.
include that in its EduLearn platform. Because it's like you said, I think you said this off mic. You could be thinking, yes, these criteria, yes, 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 this makes sense. This is objectively where I should go. But oh boy, I'm so excited about this other place. And so it does objectify it a little. We also included a line that's the sort of the X factor that you can throw in a couple,
Mhm.
fudge it a bit and add some points if you really have,
Mhm.
maybe someone that works there or something like that. Or I've always
Yeah.
wanted to live in Paris, as you say. So that is our attempt to support both newbies and veterans in a similar way to what you're talking about, to just do the research,
Nice.
get really thinking more broadly than just how exciting that location sounds.
Yes, and I think also being confident to ask questions and not think, oh gosh, I might lose out on this opportunity if I ask too many questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think it's the clarifying questions. There's so much you can research. And so showing the research you've done by saying, I saw this, 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 and this, but I would like to ask, I didn't see this, and therefore can I ask a question about it? So it's really that clarifying piece and not being afraid to do that.
Absolutely.
And we always encourage people as well to ask to speak to someone at the school who can give you perspective as well. I'm sure you do that as well, but it's really getting to know the community, getting to know as much as you possibly can. These are life changing decisions. If you're a young single teacher, a young couple teacher going off on your adventures, it's a different consideration, isn't it? It's a big consideration because of your inexperience than if you're moving a young family or a family that there's a child moving to a really essential time in their education. Are you going to move them to another school? Each life phase should steer you to different questions and different considerations. And I think I miss that sometimes with those who've done this quite a bit. They think, oh, well, I've done it, so I know what it's about. And therefore, there's a little bit of relaxation around the questioning and the considerations when going from one school to another, because somebody says, oh, well, I've had a friend at this school and they said it was great. That still doesn't mean it's going to be great for you. You've got to really do your homework still in every situation. And of course, it's like references. Somebody might give me a great reference for somebody, and I'm thrilled to hear that, or a recommendation. I often get, please look at this candidate because they will be really good for this role. And I'm thrilled to have that. But at the same time, I'm still going to do my due diligence and do the screening and vetting and do everything I'm supposed to do around that candidate. And then when that all comes out great, that extra reference is extra and it really supports the whole process.
Yeah, it's so nice to hear you saying that it empowers teachers to take the reins a little bit and say to themselves, like you said, it's a life changing experience. This is going to be my life for the next 2 and possibly more years. If there's something that is really important to you, for example, I have asthma, right? And what's the air pollution like in the city? Just to get excited about a place or a person that you've met and connected with and not consider some of those things that really are important in your day to day, you've missed an opportunity to make sure that it is a good fit for you. So I really like that. And I also feel that often a teacher will get into an interview and feel that they've got to appear to be cool with everything and that they really want this and so on, and are afraid to ask those questions because they might look like they're hesitant or that they're not fully on board with I want this school. And I'm with you there. It's really important to just take the bull by the horns and ask those questions.
It's such a lot of work to do a good job, to make sure you secure a really good job. And I talk to candidates about, what do you do when you go on holiday? Do you mosey around a supermarket if you're staying in an Airbnb, and can you find produce that is not written in your language? Are you okay with that? And if somebody says, no, 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 absolutely not. And I'm thinking, well, think about that if you go on a teaching position somewhere, because that's going to be your reality. And they might have an expat shop with all of your wonderful goodies. And we're all delighted with those, aren't we, when we're abroad, so that we can visit now and again and get our favorite, whatever that
My
is.
peanut butter.
Exactly. Especially here at Christmas this time, I'm happy there's an expat shop so I can go and buy my mince pies and get my stuffing for my turkey, right? But you really have to be okay with that ambiguity and know that you're going to have to learn. And there are people there who can help you who've been through it, but you still have to be able to cope. And especially if you don't have maybe your parents or close ones nearby that you would, if your fuse goes in your house, who do you call usually? you know, you don't have those support networks. And I don't think people think about that when they go into this. It's like, oh, I'm going on this adventure and I'm going to work and live in Paris, etc. And that is fantastic. And the schools are fantastic. And there's this other side to it, your life, the practicalities of your life. Are you okay going on a metro? Are you okay cycling in the Netherlands? You have to cycle. You're not going to survive here if you don't cycle.
Right.
Maybe a little exaggeration, but the biking culture is a big thing here. These are all the considerations, and it's being aware and being able to make informed decisions because you have all the information you need. And when people talk about the fit, then I think that's helping get to the fit. Yes, there's a gym around the corner from school, or there's a gym at school I can use. Oh gosh, there's a choir I can join. Great. Oh, I will be able to play tennis. I will be able to do those extracurricular things that I like to do in my spare time. Oh, I'm going to be asked to coach a football team after school hours. Oh, how does that work? Right? Oh, I'll be asked to guide, an extracurricular activity twice a week. Oh, I didn't do that in my home country. What does that mean?
Mm-hmm.
So again, it's all about the information that people are informed, and then they can, take those decisions to say, okay, I need to explore that a little bit more so I can increase my own understanding and therefore make a decision. Because, for schools, it's, as you know, it's a huge investment to bring people overseas.
Mm-hmm.
And then if that doesn't go well, and it can, for whatever circumstances,
Yeah.
there can always be a situation where something doesn't go well. But nowadays, with all the information available to us, and if we're doing a really good job and we have a robust recruiting system and transition system and onboarding system, we're ticking all the boxes to make sure that we're doing as best a job we can, aren't we? That someone's going to be successful when they get to post.
Right. And I would imagine, for the most part, that the people doing the recruiting, the heads of school and so on, appreciate a candidate who has done some research and is able to ask targeted questions, indicating that, yes, I'm interested and I'm really trying to get as much information as I can. And so I think it's important that people feel confident to ask those questions. And so this advice applies, as you mentioned, also to veteran international educators, not to be too complacent and say, I've done it before, I know the deal. Still research, still ask those questions. And in fact, more so than a newbie, you should know that you can get somewhere and there's that unexpected piece of the pie that you hadn't explored. Do you have any other specific tips for veterans?
I think that's really key. The complacency piece. I've been there, I've done that, I know what it, or I'll be able to settle in because. I think for veterans, a consideration I would have is the team that I'm going to join. Who's in the team? And how will I be welcomed in that team? Will I feel that I belong in that team? And what consideration has the head of school or the hiring party done to think about that? You do need some like-minded people in every team. You need people who think differently, but it's the combination that makes the success, isn't it? And I think having a veteran educator paired up with middle career teachers and those starting out, I mean, that's your best combination there, isn't it? That everybody's going to learn from each other and you're going to have that veteran perspective, but also that newness of somebody with a fresh look on teaching, let's say. And I think the combination there is just something that I see heads of schools really looking for these days. It's that combination of everything. I think our world is very transient, the 2-year contracts, the 3-year contracts. I think people are also looking at that and saying, is that still relevant? Because you don't have the same consistency if people stay a little bit longer. I hear heads of schools saying ideally if someone stays 5 years or longer, but 5 years is when you can see people coming, learning about a school, learning the culture of the school, and then bringing their ideas and spreading their magic dust. And then the results of that right, for students, and then the continuity for students seeing the same people over a period of time rather than the revolving door, if you like.
Yes, and hitting that sweet spot between continuity and staying so long that you have nothing new to contribute as well.
I think that takes different leadership capabilities. In some countries and in some schools, it is inevitable that longevity and long tenured staff will be there and there will be no movement. So, how do you keep your professional learning requirement up? How do you make sure that people are exposed to what's out there and new techniques and new ways of doing things? And I think it takes a particular leadership style to keep people on the bus and keep them interested.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's shift to a country specific question. So, for new folks looking to come overseas, China before COVID was one of the biggest destinations. One, it's the highest or was the largest population of people and just has so many quote unquote international schools. And it was also very much a sought after place. But then during COVID, for all these different reasons, people began to leave those schools. And in my reading, China in general became a less sought after place. So I'm wondering what's happening there now, if it really is a less sought after destination.
Great question and very timely. I spent 3 weeks in China just this autumn visiting schools. We had our first ISS inaugural expo in Shenzhen where we brought people together. It was a connecting event. So, not necessarily a fair, but we brought schools and candidates together to learn together in a professional learning offering and also just to network and say hi again because people had not been together for so long in China. And these events, of course, weren't able to take place during COVID. When we did this, it was really a theme of connecting and reconnecting. The rest of the world had kind of kick-started their conferences already in the last 2 years, where China had not. And we thought if we get 20, 30 schools there and maybe 200, 250 candidates, we'll be really happy with that. We had over 600 people at that event, day and a half event. It blew our minds. And it was an amazing event in the way it was set up. We also brought in exhibitors who wanted to talk to school leaders and to educators. And it was just a real mix of different types of people who really enjoyed a day and a half of connecting together. We had some fascinating keynotes. We had schools also doing presentations. And it was firstly for China, but it was another way for ISS to look at what should we be doing for educators and schools to help them. And this was a mix between a conference and a fair, kind of merged together. And since then, we've actually had a lot of questions like, well, was that actually open to everybody or only Chinese schools and Chinese educators? People are like, well, we want to come and learn in China. I think COVID closed, people who had lived in China for a long time needed to get out. They needed a break. We're seeing a lot of those folks who've worked in China before wanting to go back because it is an amazing place to work. It is incredible. And I think there's not enough known about how wonderful it is to actually have that international experience in China. I think we're still a little scared, maybe, or we don't know enough to fully be able to make those decisions. So we are seeing a return of candidates who know China. We see a return, people going back. There's still work to be done on encouraging people to want to go to China, but I think that's also some of the work we're doing to make sure that we open up people's minds to a different world. I think the main thing is mobility. People didn't like that they couldn't leave.
Yeah.
When we're all in lockdown, when someone else is deciding you can't go anywhere, that's difficult, isn't it? And I think the consideration is it one flight home, 2 flights home, 3 flights home? These are considerations nowadays that people are saying, I want to take a position that gets me home quicker. I don't want to be days traveling home.
Are you getting some data on? So here we are recording in December 2023. Are you getting some data on maybe the mid and lower tiered schools on how it's going? Do they feel they're going to be able to get their teachers to come for next year?
Practice in China also has shifted. In COVID, everybody was trying to attract everybody else's teachers because there was no external influx. You also have a lot of bilingual schools in China, and teachers in bilingual schools had opportunities in international schools, and they may not have had that before COVID because there was an influx of external teachers. So it's again a real shift in that whole market, really. And tiered schools, I don't always like that term, if I'm honest, David, and I say that respectfully to you. Students are students and they deserve the best educators from my perspective. And the big name schools attract candidates. I think that's what you're getting at. The big name schools can attract the candidates easily. And it's then those smaller schools who are maybe not so renowned and don't have that brand and that reputation that might struggle to receive as many applications. And so they have to do more, don't they? They have to be more to be out there a lot. They're the ones going to the fairs. They're the ones really trying all of the different recruitment activities to try and attract people to their schools. And there is a shift in that. And I think that's also one of the things we're trying to educate candidates to say, look beyond the name, the brand, look at all of the schools and keep your mind open because you may find that a smaller school might match you better. Your skills might be best suited there.
Well, let me ask you, I think this is a good opportunity to unpack a little bit a bilingual school compared to an international school, and then an international school that gets a lot of attention, a lot of applicants. If you could unpack that a little bit.
Particularly in China, there are a number of bilingual schools because parents want their kids to have this bilingual education. And so it would also be national curriculum and not necessarily international curriculum. International schools is such a broad term. I don't know that we could just define it in, here today, an international school is. And I think an international school is where you bring students together who, for me, an IB school is an international school because that curriculum is around the world and people can follow the same curriculum around the world. The schools that are receiving all the applications, it's also difficult for them to deal with all of those applications. That's something they struggle with. They get so many. How do they screen and vet all of those? So it's a challenge for each group, I think, and to unpack the difference. I think, students need to learn, and we want good educators to go and work in all of these schools. And I'll come back to something I said earlier in terms of the self-reflection. Where do you suit best? Where does your expertise, where does your speciality suit best?
Let's go a little bit more shifting across the globe to schools that maybe we would call in locations that we used to call them hardship posts, and then schools that maybe are just getting accredited, or maybe they've picked up bad reputations. How does that work in the world of recruiting, supporting the educators, but also the schools that are asking you for help? How do you balance that?
The hardship post is, I often heard school leaders saying, yeah, when I first get my head of school role, it's going to be in a hardship post. And this was something that I couldn't quite understand when I came into this industry again, because I was like, what do you mean a hardship post? It's a school and school has students and students deserve the best educators. So that was a difficult one for me, if I'm honest. I think hardship post is usually when a school is remote, isn't it? And the external factors are different to what we would expect. And again, I think that comes down to who are you as a person? Are you able to deal well in a situation like that? Knowing that a lot of your school life will take place in school. So I'm thinking of schools, the Republic of Congo. A lot of the school life is on campus, a lot of facilities on campus. You don't necessarily need to leave. And for safety reasons, you may not leave or choose to leave. So you have to be a particular type of person who's okay with that and who can still live a fulfilled career and life in those settings. Now, if you're a new teacher, how do you know that? I think that's really difficult. And I think it's our obligation as recruiters and leaders of that school to really, really hone in on that and to really do extra work to make sure that somebody's aware of where they're going. Hardship posts, I think these schools are the closest school communities I've seen because they've got each other, right? And They rely on each other for professional stimulation as teachers, but also as friends and family. These schools are unique. The students have unique experiences, ones that go on and stay with them throughout their whole schooling career, I think.
Thank you for sharing that. And both Audrey and I got our starts in countries that there was war, for example. And we didn't know it, but we had the character strengths and other skills to handle it at that point in our lives a long time ago. Now, from the recruiting side, in these schools that are going from the Republic of XYZ, where there is economic struggle, there was a civil war 2 years ago, and people just know those headlines, for example. How do those schools recruit? And is there a way for ISS to responsibly provide information and help these candidates, just like you said, that could be a good fit? They might not realize it, but it could be a good fit.
It's all about information and it's all about those connections. And that would be something we would make sure that candidates are connected with people in school who are on the ground, who really know what it's like and who can really speak to that. That's what ISS would do. But of course, no head of school will put somebody in danger, right? Or want to put people in danger. So people have to create a realistic outlook. During the Ukraine war, we actually supported a search for a head of school in Kiev.
Wow.
And when this post came up, we thought, okay, we're going to do everything we can to support the school, but I wonder how many applications we would get. You would be flabbergasted that this was an overwhelming popular search, and there was a lot of excellent candidates for the school board to choose from. And now this particular school has gone back to Kiev. They're back on campus now, and they've been recruiting teachers the whole time. And when the war broke out, we supported the displaced teachers from Ukraine and tried to place them in other schools around the world and support them to move on to other opportunities. And equally, we're still supporting some teachers going back, but also teachers still wanting to go and actually work there.
That's amazing.
So I think it has to do with the leadership of a school. You know, what's the reputation of a leader? How did they cope and how do they cope in these circumstances? The school community, how is that built up? Does somebody feel that they can be part of that? And the joy of teaching and wanting to give back to students in troubled zones.
That's fantastic. It's always great to hear, that a school can keep going, put itself back together, and be a popular destination. That's
Yes.
mind-blowingly fantastic. What other general trends do you see going forward in either recruiting or schools, maybe management policies, the competitions you've alluded to, expansion of virtual schools, and so on? Any other trends you want to share?
Yeah, so trends. People ask about health insurance a lot these days. It is part of the package and always was. But I think questions like, can I be medivaced home?
Hmm.
The different considerations where prior to COVID, it would not have been as explicit in my experience. The questions around the health insurance policy would not have been as explicit. I see a lot more emphasis on well-being and social emotional support for teachers and leaders. Professional development has always been important and remains so. In contracts, you see that all the time, as a professional, because people want lifelong learners and they want to make sure that their teachers are keeping up with the latest trends and so on. So there's investment in that. The question that comes up that I wouldn't have seen prior to COVID was around crisis management and pivoting from, online learning to in-person learning, because that can still happen. And we've all developed our skills, haven't we, online during COVID? And I think teachers did so more so than any profession, having to engage classrooms and students, online, amazing, particularly the little ones. The questions around the COVID period is how did you navigate that? And did you survive? Did you thrive? Or did you innovate during that time? And all three are fine, but I think these are the questions coming up as well. Resilience, it's a word we've heard a lot how would one describe their resilience, and what examples would they give? I mentioned earlier mobility. People are thinking about how quickly can they return to their home country or where their significant others are. And that's a consideration in taking a post. Whereas years ago, someone may not have even batted an eyelid if they'd take 3 flights home, because that was just what we did. We took these posts because we knew we could go home. But having been, stuck in COVID and people weren't able to travel as freely, that is a consideration right now. Can I get a plane, a train, an automobile, a ferry? How do I get home if I need to?
Let me ask you a little bit more about the insurance. So, listeners know my son Maxwell, the physics teacher, is recruiting, even though we're not seeing a lot of physics openings this year. And one thing, when I go online and look at the databases for what the schools offer for health insurance, I think you were alluding to this. In the early days, like everything was covered, the country you're in, if you travel, and then your home country. But I'm seeing school after school in country only.
Yes.
And that to me is a biggie. So I'm just wondering if that's a trend that's going to reverse, where some of the schools that maybe are struggling getting people in might say, you know what, we've got to put more money into providing a stronger and broader health insurance offering. What do you think on that one?
Yes and no. Yes, to attract teachers, I can imagine. But really, if we think about how much insurance is needed in the home country, it's usually for the breaks. So I also understand the consideration of schools having to pay for policies that are expensive, for a whole year and not a specific space and time. So I would be encouraging the insurance companies, and I think some of them are doing this, offering what would you call it, a short-term coverage,
Yes.
for those teachers back in at home base, let's say. I think that's something that can be considered, but I think the policies that we've had in the past, it's not sustainable for schools anymore just to keep doing that.
Yes.
And also, the equity piece around it, when in-country folks are not insured sometimes when working with international schools, and reimbursement is given for external insurance. That's an equitable piece as well that schools are having to consider.
So back to the disruption of COVID, I think you're on to something there. And I'm a vagabond traveler around the world, and I've got a policy that I use to go from country to country, and there are lots of offerings. So I can only guess, as you're saying, that there are insurance companies who are connecting to these schools and saying, okay, you're in country ABC, and we'll offer you a 2-month policy to go back to New Zealand, your home country, for a break. So hopefully that's going to happen. And hopefully that information is going to come out more, because if I was 25 and going overseas, that would be something I would be hopefully thinking about. And that's one of the themes of a lot of our shows in our information hub, our finances, from insurance to, if you're a US citizen, how do you pay into the Social Security and eventual Medicare system, things like that. So those are important information pieces for sure.
There are sessions we offer at an in-person fair as well. We actually had an insurer come in and let candidates know the types of things they should be thinking about as they go abroad with their finances. Yeah.
Wonderful. I'm just going to push back a tiny bit on what you said, David. When I was 25, I didn't think about health insurance at all. That's something that when you hit 50 or so, you start to say, "Ooh, better make sure there's health insurance." At least personally, when I was young, it was like, I'm not going to get sick.
Well,
Exactly,
it's that,
exactly.
and also your pension, right? How many
Right?
25-year-olds want to think about pension?
They
I know
don't
well,
think. Mhm.
and so I also talk to teachers about this, like how little you can put away. If you put a little bit away now, that's really going to help you later. And none of us did it, but it would be good for you to do it. Believe me,
Do as
getting
I
to the
say,
age
not
I'm
as
at
I
now.
do. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, exactly, totally that. Yeah.
Well, if they read Andrew Hallam's book, they will hopefully learn
Exactly.
that early. I managed to get that into my kids' heads, and they're in their 20s now, and they definitely have that start saving early and, put that little bit away, but frequently. So that's
Yes.
really good to hear that you're working with the newer teachers on thinking in that way, because I hear you. That was not always a consideration.
Yes. So the power of compounding. That's one of the lessons from Andrew. All right. So you have shared so much information, and we've thrown some questions at you that we didn't really talk about ahead of time, and you've just taken them on, no problem, and answered them. So we really appreciate that. This is going to be such an important episode for our listeners, both those first timers and the veterans. So let's finish up with what else would you like to share?
Get involved in international schools. It is the best move you could ever make. You will work the hardest that you ever work. You will be challenged so much, but the fruits, the experiences, the relationships, the friendships are just, this community is just exceptional. And every day I get up, and in Ireland, we would say this is a corny comment I'm about to make. I get up every day grateful for the work I do and the fact that I can speak to people all around the world every single day and learn and be part of this community that is so generous and giving. I think that's the thing I like most. If ever you call an international educator and you say, "Can I get some information or could you help me with this?" I honestly don't believe in all of the years I've been here that I got to know. People really share generously. And I think that's really, really special. And if you want to come into a world where you're going to learn and you're going to be able to contribute and your work will have impact and make a difference for students who are, our future. These are our global citizens of the future who we hope will go on to make good decisions in the future and become part of our leadership of our countries, right? And make maybe some better decisions without getting too political, right? I think this is an incredible world and we have an opportunity to make that difference and to have that impact. And I think do it, give it a try.
I'm going to turn that around just slightly and say that I think that ISS and all the people whose lives you've touched, and you shared with me off mic that you've done roughly 7,500 interviews, which I'm blown away by that statistic. I think that ISS and all those educators are really lucky to have crossed paths with you. Your wisdom and your openness and the way that you ask those questions to really get people thinking about some of their practices are just so valuable. So, thank you for that. Is there a way that our listeners could follow you if they want to learn more about recruiting or the services offered by ISS?
Of course. It's iss.org. That's our website. I'm on LinkedIn. You'll find me under Pauline O'Brien. I'm on X at ISS Pauline. I'm not hugely active in posting lots. On LinkedIn is probably the site I would post most on. People can reach me at pobrien@iss.edu. And ISS is posting all of our updates about our events, our membership, our learning opportunities you'll find on our websites, and also through most of the social channels you'll see adverts coming out. So should be able to find us easily.
I want to echo Audrey's sharing about just the compassion and your ability to tell things like it is. And I think get people focused on what's most important. And like you've said multiple times, what we're doing for these students. And you're our third person we've interviewed with ISS. We interviewed Dana and Nadine. And our takeaway, and I can speak for Audrey because we've talked about this, is just the human compassion, using that word again, the connections, the desires to support people from potential teachers all the way up to boards, to leaders in schools, and ultimately the students. So, very much appreciated on the work that you're doing. And I say bravo and thank you for joining us for this episode.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on. And I look forward to speaking with you again and to following your podcasts.
Thank you for joining us today on Educators Going Global.
You can find this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and all the other usual suspects.
Please subscribe, like us, and leave a review on Apple and Spotify, and let your teaching friends know about us so we can grow our community.
Please reach out at educatorsgoingglobal@gmail.com and join our Facebook group, Educators Going Global, if you have ideas, comments, or wish to share a Going Global story of your own.
You can also find us on Instagram at Educators Going Global.
Please visit our website as well, www.educatorsgoingglobal.com. All our podcast episodes are on there by topic, along with blog posts, Going Global stories, and our ever-growing resource library. For now, this is Audrey
And David.
inviting you to travel,
Teach.
and connect with us.